The massive stone arena stretched out like a hungry mouth, filled with thousands of screaming alien creatures from every corner of the galaxy. The air thick with the smell of sweat, blood and something else, fear. This wasn't just any ordinary day on planet Nexus. This was the day when the most twisted form of entertainment in the known universe was about to begin. In the center of the blood-stained fighting pit stood a small figure that made even the cruelest hearts pause for a moment. His name was Zico, a reptilian child no older than a human 8-year-old. His normally bright green scales had turned a sickly pale color, the way his species showed pure terror. His large amber eyes darted around the massive crowd, searching desperately for a friendly face that simply wasn't there. The crowd was getting restless. They had paid good money to see violence, to see the famous fighting spirit of the Scaled Ones. But instead they were watching a child shake like a leaf in a hurricane. Some of the aliens in the upper seats started throwing bits of food down at him, laughing as he flinched away from each impact. "Look at this pathetic creature," sneered a tall blue-skinned merchant, his voice carrying over the noise. "They call themselves warriors? My pet grazer shows more courage than this little worm." The insults kept coming from every direction. Species that had been enemies for centuries found common ground in mocking the terrified child. Even the arena guards, massive armored beings whose job was to keep order, were chuckling behind their face masks. What none of these cruel spectators knew was the heartbreaking truth behind Zico's presence in this place of death. Just 3 months earlier, his father had stood in this exact same spot. Commander Thex had been a hero among his people, a warrior whose name was spoken with respect across their home world. But he had made one fatal mistake: he had borrowed money from the wrong people to pay for his sick wife's medical treatment. When Thex died fighting in this very arena, his debts didn't die with him. According to the ancient laws of Planet Nexus, those debts passed to his family. Since Zico's mother had also passed away from her illness, the boy was all that remained. The loan sharks didn't care that he was just a child. Debt was debt and it had to be paid in blood. Up in the special viewing section reserved for diplomats and important visitors, Captain James Davis of the Earth vessel Horizon watched the scene unfold with growing horror. He had arrived on Nexus just 2 days ago as part of humanity's ongoing mission to build relationships with alien civilizations. His guide, a purple-skinned creature named Corex, had assured him that attending these games was essential for understanding local culture. "This is how they have always done things," Corex explained in his translator-enhanced voice. "The young ones must prove their worth in combat. It builds character and separates the strong from the weak." But James could see this wasn't about building character or proving worth. This was about a terrified child who should be playing with toys, not facing death for the entertainment of others. The way Zico kept calling out what sounded like "Papa" in his native language made James's chest tighten with an emotion he couldn't quite name. "How often do children survive these fights?" James asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Corex's expression didn't change as he consulted a data pad. "Survival rate for juveniles is approximately 12%. Though to be fair, most families try to keep their young ones out of debt situations that would lead to arena placement." 12%. The number hit James like a physical blow. This wasn't a coming-of-age ceremony or a test of courage. This was a death sentence with a tiny chance of reprieve. Down in the arena, Zico had stopped calling for his father. The child had finally realized that no rescue was coming. He sank to his knees on the rough stone floor, his small shoulders shaking as tears rolled down his scaled cheeks. The crowd's laughter grew louder, feeding off his despair like parasites. "Even his own people don't want to claim him," shouted someone from the middle sections. "Look how he cries like a hatchling." James felt his hands clench into fists. Every instinct he possessed as a human being was screaming at him to do something, anything to help that child. But Corex had been very clear about the consequences of interference. Earth was still new to galactic politics, still trying to prove they belonged among the advanced civilizations. One wrong move could destroy decades of careful diplomatic work and leave humanity isolated in the cosmos. The arena's massive gates began to groan open, the sound echoing off the stone walls like thunder. The sound that emerged from the opening gates was unlike anything James had ever heard. It was part roar, part screech, and entirely terrifying. The creature that stepped into the arena made the crowd erupt in wild cheers, but James felt his blood turn to ice water in his veins. The beast stood nearly 12 feet tall on its hind legs, covered in thick black scales that looked like natural armor plating. Its arms were longer than its body, ending in claws that could easily slice through steel. Red eyes glowed in the dim arena lighting as it surveyed its surroundings with the calculated patience of a born killer. This was a void stalker, one of the most dangerous predators in the known galaxy. Little Zico looked up from where he knelt on the arena floor, and the sight of the creature seemed to drain what little courage he had left. The child fell forward onto his hands and knees, his whole body shaking so violently that even people in the upper seats could see it. He started making a high-pitched keening sound that his species made when facing certain death. The crowd loved it. They were on their feet now, screaming and cheering as if they were watching the most entertaining show in the universe. Betting screens around the arena flashed with odds that made James sick to his stomach. The longest anyone was giving the child was 30 seconds. "Magnificent specimen," Corex commented casually as if they were discussing the weather. "That particular stalker has killed 43 opponents in the last year alone. Very efficient. Very clean kills." James couldn't take his eyes off Zico. The little boy had managed to get back to his knees, but he was swaying like he might collapse again at any moment. He kept looking up at the VIP section, and James realized with a shock that the child was looking directly at him. Not at Corex or any of the other aliens, but at James specifically. Maybe it was because humans were still relatively new to the galactic community, or maybe it was something else, but Zico seemed to sense something different about the strange pale creature in the viewing box. His large amber eyes locked onto James's brown ones across the vast arena, and in that moment, something passed between them that transcended species barriers. It was a look of pure desperation. A silent plea from a child who knew he was about to die and was reaching out to the only being in that entire coliseum who seemed to see him as more than just entertainment. The Void Stalker began moving toward Zico with deliberate slowness. It wasn't in any hurry. The creature knew its prey wasn't going anywhere, and it seemed to enjoy the anticipation as much as the crowd did. Each step it took made a heavy thudding sound that echoed off the arena walls. Zico tried to scramble backward, but there was nowhere to go. The arena was completely enclosed, with smooth walls that rose 50 feet on all sides. The only exits were the gates, and those were sealed tight. The child pressed his back against the wall and covered his face with his small clawed hands. That's when the crowd really lost their minds. They started throwing things into the arena, pieces of food, empty containers, anything they could get their hands on. Most of the projectiles were aimed at Zico, and several hit their mark, causing the already terrified child to curl up even smaller. "Kill it quickly," someone shouted from the middle tier. "Stop wasting our time." "Make it suffer," called another voice. "Teach it what happens to cowards." James felt something snap inside his chest. He had seen combat during his military days before joining the diplomatic corps. He had witnessed death and violence and all the ugly things that humans did to each other. But this was different. This was the systematic torture of an innocent child for the amusement of others, and every fiber of his being rebelled against it. "We have to stop this," he said to Corex, his voice tight with barely controlled emotion. The alien guide looked at him with something that might have been surprise. "Stop what?" "The ceremony is proceeding normally. The young one will either prove his worth or he will not. This is the way." "This isn't a ceremony," James shot back. "This is murder." Corex's purple skin shifted to a deeper shade, indicating irritation. "Captain Davis, I must remind you that you are here as a representative of your species. Any interference would be seen as a grave insult to our hosts and could result in Earth being banned from this sector entirely." The Void Stalker was now only 20 feet from Zico. The creature had stopped moving and was simply staring at the child, as if deciding which part of him to tear off first. The crowd's cheering reached a fever pitch as they sensed the kill was about to happen. James looked down at his hands and realized they were shaking. Not from fear but from rage. The moment James made his decision, time seemed to slow down around him. He could hear Corex shouting something behind him, could feel alien hands grabbing at his uniform jacket, but none of it mattered anymore. The only thing that mattered was the terrified child cowering in the arena below. James vaulted over the protective barrier of the VIP section without a second thought. The drop was nearly 50 feet straight down to the arena floor, a fall that would kill most alien species instantly. But humans had evolved on a world with heavy gravity and dangerous conditions. Their bones were dense, their muscles built for punishment that would cripple other creatures. He hit the arena floor hard, rolling to absorb the impact the way he had learned in military training years ago. Pain shot through his shoulder and ribs, but nothing was broken. The entire Coliseum fell silent for the first time since he had arrived. 50,000 alien voices stopped mid-cheer, creating an eerie quiet that made his ears ring. James got to his feet slowly, ignoring the various aches and pains from his dramatic entrance. Sand and small stones crunched under his boots as he walked across the arena floor toward where Zico huddled against the wall. The Void Stalker had stopped its advance, confused by this unexpected development. Without saying a word, James stripped off his dark blue uniform jacket. It was nothing fancy, just standard Earth diplomatic corps issue, but it was clean and warm and big enough to wrap around a scared child. He knelt down beside Zico and gently draped the jacket over the boy's shaking shoulders like a protective blanket. Up close, James could see just how young Zico really was. His scales still had the soft texture of childhood, and his claws were barely developed. This wasn't a warrior or a fighter. This was just a scared kid who should have been safe at home with his family, not facing death in front of a bloodthirsty crowd. "Hey there, little guy," James said softly, using the few words of the local language he had managed to learn. His pronunciation was terrible, but Zico seemed to understand the gentle tone if nothing else. The child looked up at him with those huge amber eyes, still trembling but no longer alone. James placed a protective hand on Zico's small shoulder and stood up, positioning himself directly between the child and the massive predator that was studying them both with growing interest. The Void Stalker tilted its head to one side, clearly puzzled by this strange new development in what should have been a simple hunt. The crowd was starting to recover from their shock, and the noise level was rising again. But now their attention was focused entirely on the human who had dared to interfere with their entertainment. James could hear voices calling out in dozens of different languages, most of them sounding angry or confused. "What is that creature doing?" someone shouted. "Is it part of the show?" called another voice. "Get it out of there," screamed a third spectator. "We paid to see the young one die." James ignored them all. His complete focus was on the Void Stalker, which had decided that this new intruder needed to be dealt with before it could return to its original target. The creature began moving toward him with the same deliberate pace it had used while stalking Zico. James had no weapons, no armor, nothing but his bare hands and the training he had received during his years in Earth's military. But he also had something that none of the other species in the galaxy seemed to understand: the absolute refusal to abandon someone who needed help, especially a child. The Void Stalker lunged without warning, moving faster than something that large had any right to. Its massive claws whistled through the air where James's head had been a split second before. He had thrown himself sideways, rolling across the sandy arena floor and coming up in a crouch several feet away. The crowd roared its approval. Finally, some action. They didn't care that a diplomatic incident was unfolding before their eyes. All they wanted was blood and violence, and it looked like they were going to get both. James circled the creature carefully, staying just outside the reach of those deadly claws. He had fought dangerous opponents before, but never anything like this. The stalker was built for killing, with natural weapons that could tear through steel and reflexes that put most other predators to shame. But James had advantages too. He was smaller and more agile than the creature expected. His species had evolved as persistence hunters, capable of outlasting prey through sheer endurance and determination. Most importantly, he was fighting for something more than his own survival. Every time the stalker came at him, James was ready. He ducked under swinging claws, rolled away from snapping jaws, and used every trick he had ever learned about combat and survival. The battle had been going on for what felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. James's uniform shirt was torn in several places, and blood dripped from cuts on his arms and face. But somehow, impossibly, he was still standing. Still fighting. Still keeping himself between the Void Stalker and little Zico. The crowd had gone through several mood changes during the fight. First shock, then confusion, then excitement as they watched this strange pale creature somehow hold its own against one of the galaxy's most feared predators. But now something else was happening. A different kind of tension was building in the arena. James could feel his strength starting to fade. His breathing was getting heavier, and his movements weren't quite as quick as they had been at the start. The Void Stalker seemed to sense this too. It was pressing its attacks harder now, forcing James to give ground step by step. Behind him, Zico had been watching the entire fight with wide eyes. The child had stopped shaking and was now sitting up straighter, James's jacket still wrapped around his small shoulders like a protective shield. And somewhere during the course of the battle, something had changed in the boy's expression. "Stop," Zico called out suddenly in his own language. His voice was small but clear, carrying across the arena in a moment of relative quiet. "Please stop fighting." James glanced back at him, surprised to hear the child speak. Zico was looking not at him but up at the crowd surrounding them. Specifically, he was looking at a section where other members of his species were seated. One of the older reptilian beings in that section suddenly sat forward, his scales shifting to a deep blue color that James didn't recognize but which seemed to mean something important. The alien started speaking rapidly to those around him, gesturing toward Zico with obvious agitation. That marking on his shoulder, the old reptilian was saying in accented galactic standard. Look at the pattern of his scales. I know those markings. That child is from the bloodline of Thex the Brave. A murmur went through the crowd as other members of Zico's species began examining the boy more closely. James didn't understand what was happening, but he could see that the mood in the arena was shifting again. The bloodthirsty excitement was being replaced by something that looked almost like embarrassment. Thex the Brave? Another voice called out. The hero who died protecting the mining colonies from raiders? The same, confirmed the old reptilian. That child is his son. His only heir. James felt the Void Stalker's attention waver as the creature also sensed the change in the crowd's energy. For the first time since the fight began, the predator seemed uncertain about whether to continue its attack. An elderly female of Zico's species stood up in the middle section of the arena seating. Her scales were a distinguished silver color that spoke of great age and wisdom. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who was used to being obeyed. This is not right, she declared loudly. The son of Thex the Brave should not be here. His father died with honor defending others. This child has done nothing to deserve this fate except be born to death that was not his making. More voices began joining hers, creating a growing chorus of protest from Zico's own people. James realized that many of them had recognized the child's heritage and were now questioning how he had ended up in the arena in the first place. The debt collectors lied to us, called out another voice. They said he was the son of a coward and a criminal. They said his bloodline was tainted. Lies? Shouted the elderly female. All lies to justify throwing a hero's son to the beasts for their entertainment. The crowd was becoming restless now, but not in the way they had been before. This wasn't excitement about violence. This was the uncomfortable stirring of people who were beginning to realize they had been manipulated into watching something truly horrible. James took advantage of the distraction to catch his breath, keeping one eye on the Void Stalker, which had backed off several steps and was looking around nervously at the changing mood of the spectators. That's when Zico did something that surprised everyone in the arena. The small boy stood up, letting James's jacket fall from his shoulders to the sandy ground. He walked past James, directly toward the massive predator that had been trying to kill them both. The crowd fell silent again as they watched the child approach certain death with calm dignity. But Zico wasn't walking like prey anymore. Despite his small size and obvious youth, there was something different in his posture now. Something that spoke of the noble bloodline that flowed through his veins. When he reached a point just out of the stalker's reach, Zico stopped and performed a gesture that made every member of his species in the arena gasp in recognition. The gesture Zico performed was something James had never seen before, but its meaning was unmistakable. The child lowered himself to one knee and extended his small clawed hands toward the Void Stalker, palms up in a display of complete vulnerability. It was the ancient pose of noble surrender, something that hadn't been seen in the arena for over a century. The crowd's silence was deafening. Even the most bloodthirsty spectators seemed to understand that they were witnessing something significant. The Void Stalker, confused by this display of dignity from what should have been easy prey, took a step backward instead of forward. The arena master, a massive alien covered in ceremonial robes, stood up from his viewing throne. His voice boomed across the Colosseum through hidden speakers, speaking in the formal language reserved for official proclamations. The young one has invoked the right of noble blood, he announced. The combat is ended. James collapsed to his knees, finally allowing exhaustion to claim him. His body ached in ways he didn't know were possible, and blood from various cuts was making dark stains in the arena sand. But they were alive. Somehow, impossibly, both he and Zico were alive. The crowd began to disperse, but not with their usual post-entertainment excitement. There was a subdued quality to their movements, as if they were ashamed of what they had been cheering for just minutes before. Many of Zico's people lingered, clearly wanting to approach the child but uncertain whether they had the right after what had transpired. Zico walked back to where James knelt in the sand and picked up the human's uniform jacket. Instead of putting it back on, he carefully folded it and held it against his chest like a treasured possession. "Thank you," the child said in heavily accented but understandable standard. "You saved my life." James managed a weak smile. "You saved your own life, kid. That thing you did at the end, that was all you." Over the following days, news of what happened in the arena spread across the galaxy faster than anyone could have imagined. The story took on different forms depending on who was telling it, but the core remained the same. A human had risked everything to protect an alien child, asking for nothing in return. Within weeks, similar arena games on dozens of worlds began shutting down. Governments that had turned blind eyes to the exploitation of children suddenly found themselves under pressure from their own citizens, who were asking uncomfortable questions about honor and tradition. James returned to Earth as something he had never wanted to be, a hero. The media attention was overwhelming, and he found himself giving speeches about human values and the importance of protecting the innocent. But what meant more to him than any medal or recognition were the messages that poured in from across the galaxy. Young beings of dozens of different species sent him drawings, videos, and handwritten notes thanking him for showing that adults could stand up for children, even when those children belonged to different species entirely. Parents wrote to tell him that his actions had inspired them to be braver in their own communities. Zico, meanwhile, had been adopted by the silver-scaled elder who had first recognized his heritage in the arena. She was a respected judge on his home world, and she made sure the debt collectors who had lied about the boy's background faced justice for their crimes. But Zico never forgot the human who had covered him with a jacket and stood between him and death. He kept that jacket in a place of honor in his new home, and as he grew older, he would often tell the story of the day a stranger became his shield. Years passed, and the phrase "covering with a blanket" became known across the galaxy as a symbol of protection and care. It appeared in art, literature, and even legal documents as civilizations began formally recognizing the rights of children regardless of species. James eventually left the diplomatic corps and started an organization dedicated to protecting young beings across the galaxy. His headquarters was on a space station positioned at the crossroads of several major trade routes, making it accessible to anyone who needed help. The organization's symbol was simple: a human hand extended over a small figure, offering protection. Beneath it were words in dozens of languages, all saying the same thing: no child fights alone. Zico grew up to become a lawyer specializing in children's rights, working closely with James's organization to ensure that what had happened to him could never happen to others. He kept that old uniform jacket until the day he died, and in his will, he donated it to a museum dedicated to interspecies cooperation. The museum's most popular exhibit became the simple display case containing a faded blue jacket with a small placard that read, "Sometimes the greatest act of courage is simply refusing to look away when someone needs help." The galaxy had learned that humans were dangerous, not because they were the strongest or the smartest, but because they would sacrifice everything for someone else's child.